Good morning, everyone. OAS Secretary General Jose Miguel Insulza, permanent and alternate representatives of member states to the OAS, Ambassador Arturo Vallarino, permanent representative of Panama and chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Irina Bokova, Director General, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, Ambassador Hubert Charles, permanent representative of Dominica, permanent observers to the Organization of American States, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, friends. Welcome and thank you all for joining us here today for the 51st Lecture of the Americas, which will focus on the topic, Promoting Human Development and Quality Education in the Americas. As most of you know, my name is Sherry Tross, and I'm the Executive Secretary for Integral Development here at the OAS. And as such, it is a particular honor for me to extend a special welcome to our keynote speaker, Ambassador Irina Bokova. She is the first woman who has been elected to head the organization, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And we're very pleased to have her here with us today to share her expertise, her experience that she has built up over time in many different capacities, working in her own native country and within the international community. I would also like to welcome the UNESCO delegation that's joining her here today. Some of you, I think, know us very well, given the various areas of collaboration between the OAS and UNESCO in education, in culture, in technology, and in social and economic development. And we certainly look forward to an ongoing collaboration. So to get us started this morning, I would like to invite Secretary General Insulza to deliver an official welcome, and he will also invite Ambassador Bokova to the stand. He will frame her presentation, and he will tell you about some of what we're doing here at the Organization of American States in terms of education, science, and culture. Secretary General.
Good morning, buenos días, permanent and alternate representatives of the member states and the observer states, Ambassador Hubert Charles, permanent representative of Dominica, Ambassador Irina Bokova, Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And I will go on in Spanish because you understand my language as much as everybody else. Es un gran honor recibir aquí hoy día en esta 51ª Cátedra de las Américas sobre la promoción del desarrollo humano y la calidad de la educación en las Américas. El tema es ciertamente muy fundamental en nuestra región, donde en los últimos años, a la luz de los objetivos del milenio, hemos hecho progresos muy importantes en materia de acceso a la educación. Conversábamos recién con la directora que son muy pocos, por desgracia todavía existen, pero son muy pocos los países de América en los cuales no existe pleno acceso a la educación. Y el tema que, por cierto, se plantea entonces, un tema muy vinculado con los problemas de la desigualdad, es el que dice relación precisamente con esta conferencia, la calidad de la educación en las Américas. Las preguntas de si estamos preparados, si los jóvenes de nuestra región, dicho sea paso, se habla mucho de lo que se denomina el bono demográfico, demographic bonus de América, que tiene América Latina, con una cantidad muy importante de jóvenes que le van a permitir, por lo tanto, que supuestamente deberían permitir una escalada hacia un mayor desarrollo, en la medida en que estén preparados para eso, claro. De lo contrario, el bono demográfico, the bonus becomes an onus, actually, and it's un menos. Y la pregunta es entonces si estos jóvenes están siendo preparados apropiadamente para enfrentar las demandas de la sociedad. ¿Qué pasa con aquellos que no completan sus estudios? Porque todavía tienen algún acceso limitado. ¿Cómo pueden los gobiernos actuar en esta materia? El sector privado también. ¿De qué manera podemos, por lo tanto, ayudar a los países a hacerlo mejor? Y con eso, no solamente tener más justicia, sino que tener también más competitivos. Estas es las preguntas y muchas otras que escucharemos hoy desarrollar a nuestra invitada. Tenemos con UNESCO una antigua relación, hemos trabajado en muchos asuntos juntos, quiero solamente recordar algunos, los desarrollos en materia científica en nuestros programas sobre recursos acuíferos, el portal educacional de las Américas, que participa junto con UNESCO en comités técnicos sobre educación abierta, sobre alfabetismo móvil, aprendizaje, alfabetismo móvil. Hemos cooperado con UNESCO en el uso de tecnologías móviles también. Hemos trabajado muy recientemente en los temas vinculados a la diáspora haitiana. El representante especial de UNESCO, Michel Jean, participó en el último congreso de la diáspora haitiana que tuvimos. Y tendríamos muchos otros ejemplos que que están aquí escritos, pero no voy a desarrollar porque no creo que tenga tiempo. Solo quiero terminar reafirmando que este tema de la educación está en nuestra Carta Democrática Interamericana de manera muy precisa. La pobreza, el analfabetismo y los bajos niveles de desarrollo humano son factores que afectan adversamente la consolidación de nuestra democracia, dice el artículo 12 de la Carta. Y nuestra Carta Social de las Américas, que hemos aprobado no hace mucho, señala que la educación es un derecho social fundamental y que todos nuestros ciudadanos tienen derecho a educación gratuita y universal, preprimaria y primaria, que se construya a través de los principios del pluralismo, la calidad, la libertad, la igualdad, la justicia, entre otros. Y ciertamente, por cierto, la paridad de género en esta materia es también muy indispensable. Pero las cifras no son buenas. 38% de los alumnos de tercer grado aún no tienen un nivel mínimo de comprensión de su lectura. Un 43% de los mayores de los estudiantes de 15 años leen bajo el nivel básico. La mitad de nuestros alumnos de tercer grado no resuelven aún problemas básicos en la educación, de suma, resta, multiplicación. Y la mitad de nuestros alumnos de sexto grado y 43% de los de 15 años no llegan a las expectativas mínimas en materia científica. Por lo tanto, esa es una prioridad de nuestra organización, ciertamente lo es. No olvidemos que nuestra segunda cumbre de las Américas, que se realizó precisamente en mi país, en Santiago de Chile, fue dedicada a los temas de educación. Y muchos de estos objetivos fueron planteados y puestos en la agenda. Hemos trabajado intensamente en ello, pero tenemos que ser capaces de evaluar nuestros resultados y prepararnos para una próxima envión, para un próximo esfuerzo, que necesariamente debe ser el de mejorar sustantivamente la calidad de la educación en todos sus niveles. No solamente en los niveles de educación primaria, preprimaria y básica, que, dicho sea de paso, se demuestra son cada vez más fundamentales, cada vez se demuestra más que son absolutamente fundamentales para el aprendizaje futuro y para la plena incorporación a la sociedad, sino que también en el nivel secundario y en el nivel universitario, en el cual muchos de nuestros jóvenes golpean por primera vez las puertas de la universidad y quieren saber si tendrán una educación adecuada. Sin más, quiero darle la bienvenida a la directora, agradecerle su presencia acá y el tiempo que se ha dado para conversar con nosotros y darle la palabra.
Muchas gracias, Dr. José Miguel Insulza. Excellencies, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it is for me a great privilege to be here at the Organization of American States for this very prestigious lecture series. I would like first and foremost to thank you, Secretary General Insulza, for your very kind words of welcome and also for the very inspiring, frank, and I would say committed introduction that set very well the stage for my presentation. Searching our archives, we found that UNESCO's first cooperation agreement was signed already in 1950 by the prominent Mexican writer and statesman and the former Director General of UNESCO and the former Minister of Education of Mexico, Jaime Torres Bodet. I'm very proud to follow in his footsteps more than half a century later. In our increasingly connected, interdependent, but also quite unequal and fragile world, multilateral and regional organizations' imperative is for build more inclusive and sustainable response to global challenges. I once again want to thank you for your very kind invitation to focus on education today. Many years ago, one of Latin America's great poets and statesmen, the Chilean Pablo Neruda, permanent delegate of Chile with UNESCO, declared before our executive board, education will be our epic. Education is the most demanding task, the summum of what human beings have done and what they are capable of doing. When Neruda spoke about an epic, he captured the scale of what is at stake. Education today remains our foremost priority. It is the center of our fight for human rights, human dignity, and human security. Education drives development and prosperity. So rights, security, and prosperity, these are the overarching goals of the Organization of American States. And also they are in UNESCO's DNA, as we say. They start with building peace in the minds of women and men, in the minds of girls and boys. We stand today, ladies and gentlemen, at a critical crossroads, 1,000 days less from achieving the Millennium Development Goals and Education for All goals. These goals, we know, are ambitious. They were adopted by the majority of nations, and they have made already a difference. More children are in school than ever before. There have been significant breakthroughs in enrollment in regions of the world that stood farthest away from the goals at the turn of the century. But all regions are facing very deep challenges in a rapidly shifting global landscape. Globalization has accelerated, inequalities have deepened, new technologies are revolutionizing how we communicate and share information and knowledge. Societies everywhere face rising pressures from economic, food, and energy crisis, from the impact of climate change. The 2013 Human Development Report, launched in UNESCO a month ago, captured some of these changes. Focusing on the rise of the South, it highlights the rapid advances of countries such as Brazil and Mexico, and the growth of the middle class in the South. This middle class has rising expectations for themselves and for their children. From our standpoint, one of the most compelling conclusions of this report is what drives this transformation. The report is unequivocal. Investing in people's capabilities through health, education, and other public services is not an appendage of the growth process, but an integral part of it. Many countries in the region have acquired middle-income status, and two already, Chile and Mexico, are OECD members. But across the region, development models are under scrutiny. With 167 million people living in poverty, Latin America is the most unequal region in the world. a quarter of the urban population lives in slums. So tackling these challenges calls for new thinking about the meaning of progress. It calls for a new vision of human dignity and capacity, something I have modestly referred to as a new humanism. The need to learn to live together has never been more urgent in societies that are increasingly connected and diverse. The world is getting younger every day, and the expectations of young people are rising for decent jobs, for dignified lives. The world is changing, ladies and gentlemen, and education must adapt and provide all women and men with the tools and skills they need to make the most of the opportunities of change. The 21st century will be built on knowledge societies that are inclusive and that harness the full power of science, technology, and innovation. Not investing in education jeopardizes the future of people and of nations. Today's educational shortfalls are the social shortfalls of tomorrow. So where do we stand now? Yesterday, I attended the Learning for All ministerial meeting at the World Bank with United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Haiti was among the 8 countries represented by both its education and finance ministers. The aim was to make a diagnosis and ready partners across acceleration strategies to reach universal education. There is a sense of urgency and determination at the highest level. Globally, 61 million children of primary age and some 70 million at the secondary level are missing out of their right to education. The situation is especially difficult for girls and marginalized parts of the population who face obstacles of discrimination compounded by poverty. In the Latin American and Caribbean region, almost 2.7 million children are still missing out of primary school, and 1.7 million teenagers are out of secondary schools, failing to gain vital skills for future employment. The UNESCO 2012 Education for All Global Monitoring Report finds that over 8 million people aged 15 to 24 in Latin America and the Caribbean have not completed primary school and need alternative pathways to acquire basic skills. There is clear evidence from the Latin American Laboratory for the Assessment of the Quality of Education, coordinated by UNESCO OREALC, our regional office for education in Latin America, that students in primary school are not acquiring even rudimentary levels of competence in reading, writing, mathematics, and science. At the secondary level, school dropout is increasing the marginalization of youth left unable to find decent jobs for decent livelihoods. This situation threatens social cohesion and holds economic development. We have strong arguments for education. We know that education is a force for equity, for human dignity, for opportunity. Studies estimate that 1 extra year of schooling can increase an individual earnings by up to 10% and average annual GDP by 0.37%. Education gives a voice, it encourages political participation, and it increases opportunities on the labor market. A woman's level of education impacts not only on her economic and social position, but also on her children's nutrition, health, and education. The impact is felt across society. So the key question we need to ask is now how education can contribute to mitigate inequality. First, we have to make sure education is accessible to all. This means targeted policies to reach the most marginalized and disadvantaged groups. The Latin American region has a strong record in improving school attendance through social protection programs. Nicaragua's Red de Protección Social program, Brazil's world-renowned Bolsa Familia, Mexico's Oportunidades. These are initiatives that have broken the cycle of poverty for millions of children and their families. A basic education of 9 years is a minimum requirement for shaping a decent future. This is why we need a holistic perspective. Much more is needed to be done to give young people alternative pathways to learning, or to learning again, to acquire skills that will unlock opportunities. And I'm thinking particularly of young women, of the urban and rural poor. Second, we must focus on quality, to be sensitive to cultural and linguistic diversity, to bolster the status and skills of teachers, to harness the power of information and communication technologies, to ensure relevant learning content for the right skills. When education is relevant and valued, it has an impact on access. When systems embrace diversity, they are more inclusive. Many Latin American countries have rich experience in intercultural and bilingual education. This has an influential role to play in combating prejudice and building respect. And this brings me to the third point: how education contributes to giving students the skills and values to make positive contributions to adapt to change. In a world of rising diversity, how can education foster stronger cultural literacy, solidarity, and mutual understanding, shape new values and attitudes for sustainability? Last year, we launched UNESCO USA Brazil Teaching Respect for All project. It is elaborating educational materials to fight racism and promote tolerance, which countries can then adapt to their context and needs. Fundamentally, quality education must craft the societies we aspire to: inclusive, dynamic, and sustainable societies, free of poverty, societies anchored in respect for cultural diversity and human rights. These questions are at the heart of educational debates globally and regionally, at a time when we are engaged in deep consultation to shape the post-2015 development agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, señoras y señores, conozco que México en enero pasado fue sede de una reunión regional de ministros de educación auspiciada por la UNESCO, quienes debatieron a este respecto. Sus recomendaciones se enfocaron en el reto de reducir la inigualdad y la pobreza a través de proporcionar educación de calidad. En la ocasión, se identificaron los principales desafíos de 2015. Por ejemplo, el desarrollo docente, el acceso a la calidad de la educación, la consolidación y el avance en la igualdad entre los géneros, la mejoría de los sistemas de evaluación. Los debates de los ministros se enfocaron hacia tópicos que deberán orientar nuestro pensamiento acerca de la educación más allá de 2015. La necesidad de desarrollar currículos y programas innovadores en educación y ciudadanía centrados en los jóvenes, la cultura de paz a través de la convivencia, la educación física, los deportes, la educación de sexualidad y la resolución de conflictos. También propusieron avanzar en la utilización y apropiación de las tecnologías de información y comunicación, el desarrollo de programas enfocados en competencias, la expansión de la educación terciaria y superior y el desarrollo de la educación multicultural e intercultural. El diagnóstico y aspiraciones expresadas por los ministros fueron reiterados en la consulta global sobre educación para todos, después de 2015, que tuvo lugar en Dakar en el mes pasado. En ella hubo un acuerdo total y completo en cuanto a que la educación para todos, con equidad y a lo largo de toda la vida, debe ser el principal objetivo. Esta visión es sólidamente apoyada por la UNESCO. La OEA y la UNESCO trabajamos juntas para alcanzar esta meta. Compartimos la convicción que los maestros son los actores clave. La formación inicial y en servicio, la certificación, la acreditación, el desarrollo de estándares mínimos y la evaluación docente son áreas que merecen toda nuestra dedicación. Nuestra estrategia regional sobre maestros, encabezada por nuestra Oficina Regional de Santiago, ha construido sólidos consensos en torno a criterios claves para el diseño y el fortalecimiento de políticas magisteriales en la región, desde la formación previa al servicio hasta el desarrollo profesional. La estrategia constituye una respuesta a la urgencia para contar con una acción de mayor envergadura, enfocada al magisterio, llena de vacío ahí donde no había un mecanismo de coordinación regional relativo a los maestros. También hace énfasis en la importancia de contar con un proceso colectivo, participativo, que permita que las políticas realmente funcionen. La Organización de Estados Americanos es un socio de la mayor importancia para esta estrategia regional. Al final de este año, la OEA lanzará una nueva plataforma dedicada a compartir políticas y prácticas exitosas a favor del magisterio en la región. Esto es crucial, señoras y señores, pues todos los logros en materia de aprendizaje muestran que los avances educativos están directamente relacionados con los maestros bien calificados. Observo que existen más áreas para nuestra cooperación conjunta, contenidos y prácticas curriculares y el uso de nuevas tecnologías como herramientas innovadoras de la enseñanza-aprendizaje. El desarrollo de la banda H posee un vasto potencial para ampliar las oportunidades de aprendizaje. La tecnología puede ser un poderoso multiplicador de la educación, pero hay que saber cómo usarla. Este es uno de los mensajes del reciente informe de la Comisión de Banda Ancha para el Desarrollo Digital. Permítame aquí de indicar que el marco de competencias de los docentes en materia de tecnologías y información y comunicación de la UNESCO, que se está experimentando en México y otros países de América Latina, o las primeras directrices sobre el aprendizaje móvil que publicamos en febrero con el apoyo de Nokia. Vivimos en un tiempo de extraordinarias oportunidades, pero también de profundas divisiones. La educación debe acrecentar las oportunidades y reducir las divisiones. Para esto, resulta esencial que la educación crezca en la agenda política de los gobiernos en todas partes. Es por ello que el secretario general de las Naciones Unidas lanzó en septiembre de 2012 la iniciativa global La Educación ante Todo, que la UNESCO está ayudando a implementar, para alentar la acción internacional, poner a cada niño en la escuela, incrementar la calidad de la educación y promover la ciudadanía global. El secretario general seleccionó 2 países de la región, Brasil y Guyana, para desempeñar el papel de campeones de la educación, para, mediante el ejemplo, colocar la educación en primer plano. He percibido este compromiso en todo el continente. Estuve recientemente en México, donde el gobierno ha colocado la reforma en educación en lo más alto de su agenda. El lanzamiento por el presidente Enrique Peña Nieto de la reforma constitucional en materia educativa es una poderosa señal del compromiso para transformar la educación e incrementar su calidad. Hay ejemplos similares en otros países de la región. Es así que históricamente estamos en esta región en el momento justo para asumir con más fuerza que nunca el compromiso de lograr una educación de calidad que sea relevante, equitativa, eficiente y de acceso para todos y todas. Una forma también de decir, cuenten con el apoyo de la UNESCO y en particular con el de nuestra Oficina Regional para Educación a lo largo de esta noble tarea de reforma educacional. La educación, soy convencida, es un instrumento y un proceso poderoso que permite a los jóvenes y adultos que se encuentran social y económicamente marginados salir de la pobreza y participar plenamente en la vida de la sociedad. La política educativa es la más preciada de las políticas a largo plazo y necesita ser visionaria, necesita ser estratégica y necesita compromiso. Como escribió el Premio Nobel mexicano Octavio Paz, y cito, la sabiduría no reside ni en permanecer estático, ni tampoco en el cambio, sino en la dialéctica entre ambos. Esto es muy cierto en el caso de la educación. En esencia, la educación significa colaboración, colaboración entre maestros, estudiantes y comunidades, entre gobiernos, sociedad civil y asociados privados bilaterales y multilaterales. Nuestras dos organizaciones son, con su cometido a favor de la paz, de los derechos humanos y el desarrollo inclusivo, están idealmente emplazadas para promover esta meta. Una vez más, reciban mi gratitud por haberme brindado el honor de dirigirme a ustedes en el día de hoy. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Things that I want to pick up just before I turn the floor over to people in the audience. Can we check this, please? Thank you. You spoke about alternative pathways to learning, which I thought was a very important issue that you raised. It's one of the things that we're looking at within the Secretariat for Integral Development, and so I'd like you to expand on that a little bit. All of you here, I think, know that within SADE, we've been looking at education in a number of different ways, but more and more we're putting emphasis on access to education, access to quality education, as you said, innovation in education. And you mentioned quality as being one of the top things. And so I'd like you, because all of us come at this from a different angle, to give us your definition of what you consider to be quality education, because that is something that we've had a debate about. That's one. The second thing is, we know that even where there are very educated populations, and we had this discussion, I think, just 2 weeks ago in this same room with a gentleman from the OECD who came in, and we had a discussion here on economic issues. And we talked about in areas where there's significantly educated populations, but still there are skill gaps that are very important and significant. So, as you're looking at quality education and human development, how do you see this issue of the skills gap playing out, and how is that being integrated into your overall thinking in terms of how we approach education? And after that, I'll open up the floor to the audience.
Well, I think you put very fundamental questions. Some of them are still into the, I would say, into the making. The reply to that is into the making. First, starting with what you mentioned about different types of learning, I would say, in education. We do believe that in some of the environments, but maybe before that, let me just say that from our perspective, education is one of the most important public goods that governments have to provide to their citizens. I think this is the underlying, I would say, reason and basis that we work on. And we know that in some environments, formal education cannot bridge the gap and to reach out and solve the problem with the literacy, because we have still a huge illiterate populations, adult illiterate population. Sometimes it cannot tackle the problem with the dropouts of schools. And we have to give a second chance. And we think that non-formal education also is extremely important in many environments. We have community learning centers. We have schools of second chance, courses. I think this is very important. This creates also enabling environments for children to stimulate them also to continue their education. So I think both should be supported. Then you mentioned the question about quality education and how we measure. Now let me say that probably this is one of the most difficult questions, and there are different models of tackling that. What we are right now engaging in, it's creating some kind of a metrics. We called it a learning metrics. Our Institute of Statistics is working with the World Bank and with OECD, with the Brookings and some other, in order to make some kind of a general guidelines which are global. And we are almost finalizing as far as the primary education is concerned. Then we will also move to the secondary education because we know that nowadays it's not just literally reading and writing, the technicality of this, it's much more than that. Moving to the other part also of this question is very much linked also as to what kind of education we give in terms of skills, in terms of adaptability to bridge the different levels of education between the primary and the secondary, and then between the secondary and the tertiary, because in many countries it's a problem. They struggle to make these links between the different educations. There are gaps in between them. And I would say the overall holistic approach to this is very important. For a too long time, the international community was concentrating only on access, only on primary education, only on the question of let's get kids in school and then we will see what happens. This is enough. And it is not enough, we see now. Because it neglected the question about teachers. Where do you take teachers from qualified if you don't have all the levels of education? It created also a problem of decoupling the links between the different stages of education. And it crippled actually societies. It's created when you have not qualified teachers in many marginalized areas particularly, or when you don't provide education in the mother tongue in some circumstances with the minority groups and marginalized communities, then you create a big mass of illiterate people who don't have the skills to integrate in their public economic life, which are, according to the statistics, they have gone through primary education. So and where do you put them then? I think all these are very linked issues. Now, skills, it's the big thing nowadays. It's our last global monitoring report last year that we published, because UNESCO is publishing every year global monitoring reports on different aspects of educational problematics. Last year, report was on skills and education. And we showed that unless you adapt also your education systems to give skills, to enable young people to find jobs, to adapt them, to create their own enterprises or just some basic technical vocational training in many environments. If your education system is only vertical oriented only to the tertiary education and everybody goes to universities and even in some poor quality or not always, and they are not adapting their environments where there is a need for skills, there is unemployment, and you can't bridge this gap. So this is vital nowadays. And I would say the changing educational, the way you provide education, the changing educational agenda overall made us think of thinking it really deep into what are these educational systems that are needed today with all its elements. You know that there have been two important world reports on education. One was in the 70s, the so-called FOR report. The second was the Delors report by the former president of the European Commission, which was launched in '95. And we thought that it's the right moment, almost 20 years later, to revisit this agenda. And we just convened a group of experts thinking, and reading the report, you see that still a lot of these things are valid, but it's such a changed landscape, and we have to think differently. There are open educational resources. There are new technologies coming. It's the way you interact in schools is different. It's a very different landscape. So we are right now trying to put this together and submit it to the international community.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let's open up the floor. I see we have two questions over here. Let's go with the permanent observer, and then we have Nelson.
Yes, of course.
Is the microphone?
Well, thank you, Secretary General Volkova, for your interesting presentation. And I would like just to focus a bit more on university education, and especially the cooperation that can be given by European states. Right now, Italy is undergoing a crisis, like others, an economic crisis. So it's quite difficult to go on promoting cooperation activities with small financial means. But we have a tradition of large cooperation with universities. With the Americas, we have around 800 agreements of Italian universities with Latin American universities. And but many are personal initiatives of professors who have special links with some specific universities. And my impression is that somehow there are duplications. Sometimes they could bring up opportunities of cooperation with the scientific institutions of the Latin American government involved. What comes to mind is, for instance, a cooperation between Chilean and Italian universities that worked only, that had some scientific results, quite interesting, but only worked because there was an involvement at a high level of both governments. So my question is whether UNESCO is doing something to promote and support this type of inter-university cooperations, and if you see this as a way to develop also the scientific knowledge and institution of Latin American countries. Thanks.
Nelson?
Muchas gracias por su presencia y su conferencia, señora. Viendo el último informe de UNESCO y UNICEF sobre efectivamente el problema que tienen de educación en los niveles más elementales, preescolar y las primarias, por decirlo así, pues estamos viendo que en Centroamérica y en el Caribe pues hay más de 23 millones de niños esas dificultades o de retraso o de no asistencia a la escolaridad. Esto indudablemente a uno que no es especialista en educación, pues como decimos en mi país, le para los pelos de punta, sobre todo porque, pues claro, si de niños no tienen educación, pues olvidémonos de la educación secundaria y olvidémonos de la educación universitaria, porque obviamente estos niños van a empezar a tener que vivir, a tener que trabajar para poder sobrevivir y va quedando la educación en segundo, tercero, cuarto, quinto lugar. A mí hay una cosa que me preocupa muchísimo y es, me puedo equivocar, pero es mi percepción. Las entidades multilaterales, yo creo que a veces tienen proyectos y los proyectos son muy interesantes, pero a veces no se hablan las unas con las otras y hay duplicidad de funciones. Por ejemplo, la OEA es un organismo eminentemente político y lo que quiere es juntar, lo que quiere es tener este tipo de escenarios para que las políticas sean más efectivas. Pero algo está funcionando mal porque el Banco Mundial o el Banco Asiático o el Banco Africano tiene programas muy bien, seguramente muy bien estructurados, pero tiene como todavía espacios donde geográficamente no permite el uno que se meta en el otro, en el campo del otro. Y obviamente hay muchos recursos que hay cantidad de elementos muy dispersos, pero el foco se nos olvida. Entonces hay proyectos y programas.
Nelson, la pregunta es ¿cómo pueden trabajar juntos
¿Cómo podemos
las
trabajar
organizaciones?
juntos las organizaciones multilaterales
Okay,
para
gracias.
buscar más eficiencia en el aspecto educativo?
Next question, please.
Good afternoon. I'd like to appreciate Secretary Bokova for being with us and sharing such insight with us. My name is Diane Garza, and I work at Georgetown University with the Latin American Board, and we basically seek to increase the relationships between our university and Latin America through meaningful partnerships. We currently have a program where we bring young leaders from Latin America to study at Georgetown from the corporate, public, and nonprofit sectors. What we basically are trying to do is to increase the development of human capital so that they can go back to their countries and promote development. So I have two quick questions. One is, how can we as an American university promote the educational development in Latin America, whether it's through partnerships with other universities? And we also are promoting the development of social entrepreneurs. There's a very big movement in people that are on the ground carrying out different projects to promote education at the primary and all different levels. So how can we also as a university promote this sort of development that's coming from people that are on the ground and social entrepreneurs who are developing local projects? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ambassador, if you could respond to these first three, and then we can have a second round if there are more questions.
Yes, thank you very much. The first question about universities. Yes, indeed. We at UNESCO, we are promoting university cooperation and as a basic, I would say, responsibility that we have in the area of education. What we think is important, and we're also looking at the quality of higher education and of, I would say, compatibility. We had a very interesting conference recently organized with OECD on university ranking, because we know that there are different models of university ranking and different views of appreciation of what the quality higher education is. And we think it's important that we kind of get together this educational community and start working on something which is more focused and more universally accepted. And then, of course, it's the big question about the mutual recognition of diplomas, which is also a big question. Until now, we have been working regionally. We have been working in regional conventions, in regional agreements on that. I think it's time that we start working globally also, because this will bring all this question about criteria and quality and all this. Because in a globalized world, when you have really movements of people and economies, and you need to have some kind of a basic also criteria which is very much linked to that. So we are moving to that. But probably we are strongest in our chairs. We have, I think, more than 800 chairs, or even more. Maybe Liz will... 800, so I have retained right the figure. And these chairs in different universities, we try to make them work together depending on which area they are. If we have a chair which is in water management, in research of clean water, of management, we put them into kind of network so that they work together in their research, and we have a network of chairs on gender studies in different universities. We have a network of chairs that is in heritage, in the, cultural heritage and protection and preservation. So we try to make this kind of a specialty networking researchers and projects working together across the globe, where we consider that, of course, it's very much linked to our agenda. In terms of working together, it is very frustrating, and I do agree with you sometimes to see in countries that different organizations diverge. But I think there is a lot of positive movement. It's the delivering as one. The United Nations reform and delivering as one is very much onto the, I would say, agenda of United Nations. I just come recently from twice a year, the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, is convening a meeting, as it is called, of the CHIC Executive Board. We all heads of agencies and funds and programs get together, and we discuss the global issues and how we work together, what is most important on the agenda. Now, I think it's a very kind of happy development that we have as the head of the World Bank, Dr. Jim Kim, who is very much committed to development and to the United Nations. So for the first time, we had him with us sitting the whole day. And we have invited 3 resident coordinators for the first time from 3 countries in order to see how we work together in these countries, whether we deliver, what is the difficulties, the bottlenecks, and to try to work it out. Because I think it's crucial in times of decreasing international development aid, in times of tightening belts in many countries, even in emerging economies, budgets are really focusing on some important social issues, and we have to work under very strict, we need to not to disperse resources, but we need to focus where the necessity is most. And I think working in country profiles together and agreeing on, as we call them, UNDAVs, the framework agreements of how we work together, helps a lot. I wouldn't say that we are as yet there, but we have made an incredibly big progress. And countries that come back and say, look, Uruguay, for example, it was one of the 8 pilot countries of working together, and say, look, we don't want to go back to the previous way. We want you to work together here. Because it was a good results that when worked together, it was a good results. So, as I said, it's not there, but we are striding, we're making a good progress. Now, the question about how American universities can, I think as any other university, it's most welcome that we can promote some ideas, but if you allow me, I have here the director of our office, Santiago, maybe you could give, if you allow me, Jorge, maybe you could give a very concrete example of how we work with some American universities. Just one example. For example, with the Pennsylvania Penn University, last year I signed an agreement that works in literacy. They have a big school of education focusing on literacy, and now we have already a lot of their students and staff going in our offices around the world, working with us on literacy, giving also innovative ideas of how to do it in social entrepreneurship. Most welcome. It's a very new thing that is emerging, coming. We're trying to focus also on such projects there, so most welcome. I don't know whether, Jorge, you want to add something more?
Jorge, can you please use the microphone so that we can
you
get
may
the
go
interpreters.
there. You may go, please, please. It's a concrete from the... Help me.
Oh, this wasn't planned. The UNESCO chairs that the Director General mentioned is also a very good example. And I will invite the colleague from Georgetown University to explore that, because we could have a network of UNESCO chairs on social entrepreneurship in the Americas. with Georgetown University being one of those, and then I think that would be a very good, interesting approach how to make collaboration real between universities. And let's not forget that the quality of higher education in Latin America is critical, and that's one way to improve it. It's part of what we call the umbrella of South-South cooperation.
Thank you, Joaquin. The right time, the right moment to help the boss.
I think more and more we're seeing a lot of this collaboration, certainly in the case of the OIS, and Secretary General Insulza can speak to that if he wishes. But more and more we're signing agreements with different universities, and we have a whole consortium of universities throughout the Americas, as well as in Europe, that we're working with. And that has been, I think, something that's contributed tremendously to our capacity to be able to deliver to member states in terms of human development and education. Certainly also I want to mention, because this has already come up, that in terms of the international institutions, we do work pretty closely together. I mean, right now we have UNESCO, OIS, World Bank, and IDB, for example, working on mobile learning and literacy. And we have a number of those collaborations that are going forward that maybe are not known as widely, and everybody might think, okay, well, this one is working there, this one is working there, but we're actually doing it in a very coordinated way. Are there any more questions from the floor? Yes.
Buenas tardes, es un gusto conocerla finalmente. Mi pregunta va más guiada a lo que usted estaba diciendo sobre la ciudadanía del mundo y la importancia de la educación, de crear ciudadanos y personas capaces de transformar y cambiar. Entonces mi pregunta es, ligado al discurso del desarrollo y al discurso de crear sociedades más sostenibles y más preocupadas por las generaciones futuras, ¿cómo hace usted esa relación entre educación formal, ¿cierto?, la que estudiamos en un colegio, en una universidad, y lo que significa ser estudiantes del mundo o ciudadanos del mundo? Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a usted por esta cuestión, porque me parece importante, fundamental hoy día. Hablamos de globalización, hablamos de conectividad, hablamos de los desafíos hoy día vinculados con el cambio climático. Vemos en muchas partes del mundo conflictos que son vinculados con intolerancia. Me parece que este mundo es muy frágil y sabemos muy bien, y tal vez en nuestra Constitución que ha dicho que la guerra empieza en la mente de la gente, es en la mente de la gente que las defensas de la paz deben construirse. Es muy importante después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, pero hoy día esta responsabilidad todavía queda. Y por eso nos parece que todo empieza en la escuela. Es en las escuelas, a través de las currículas, a través de un proceso muy interactivo con los docentes, y que se deben poner el fundamento del respeto de derechos humanos, de la dignidad humana, de la igualdad de género, de nuestra actitud hacia el medio ambiente. Nosotros tenemos toda una parte muy grande en nuestro sector de educación que se llama Educación para el Desarrollo Sostenible. Es muy importante, es apoyado por algunos países que son muy atentivos, como Japón, Corea, algunos otros. Y nos parece que es fundamental hoy día que si hablamos de la educación de calidad, no se puede no hablar de este fundamento que es educación para la ciudadanía. Por eso hemos propuesto al Secretario General de Naciones Unidas de incorporar por primera vez en su iniciativa Educación ante todo, el tercer eje, que es exactamente esta educación para una ciudadanía. Yo voy a darle un ejemplo. Yo estuve el año pasado en Túnez. Nosotros sabemos las transformaciones que los países árabes en este momento pasan. Yo estaba invitado en una escuela discutiendo con escuela secundaria, discutiendo con los estudiantes diferentes cosas. Me preguntaron sobre la educación, cuál es la democracia, la participación en elecciones, el proceso participativo, porque no tenían elecciones nunca en su vida. Y hemos preparado todo un manual, lo que es su ciudadanía, cuáles es elecciones, cuáles es comunidades locales y cuáles responsabilidades por comités locales, por qué debemos respetar las minorías, las otras religión, elementos básicos que para nosotros son elementos conocidos, que no consideremos hasta importantes, pero para muchos países es fundamental de tener esto. Y después hablamos de cultura de paz, hablamos de no violencia, hablamos de alfabetismo cultural. Es fundamental hoy día, con todos los conflictos que tenemos en este mundo, y todo esto empieza en la escuela. Entonces, ¿cómo podemos formar, educar jóvenes responsables para sus sociedades, para sus comunidades, para sus familias, para respetar los derechos de los otros, para respetar el proceso democrático? Es fundamental hoy día. Y por eso nos alegra mucho que el secretario general y todos los otros partenarios en el sistema de Naciones Unidas han adoptado la misma actitud, el mismo entendimiento sobre el proceso educativo. Para nosotros es fundamental hoy día.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. And that's the last question. So I'm going to use this opportunity to actually introduce somebody else to you, somebody that many of you know, but perhaps you do not know that he's uniquely qualified to comment on this particular presentation, because Ambassador Hubert Charles, permanent representative of Dominica, is an educator himself. He is the former president of the Dominica State College. He has worked in the Ministry of Education, Sports, and Culture in Dominica. And he's also a former employee of UNESCO. So, Ambassador Charles.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is true. I actually consider myself quite lucky because to the extent that I can talk about having a non-university education, it actually came from UNESCO. And I really want to give credit not just to the organization, but the way it treated and liberated its staff members so that they could themselves be innovators. So I found that while I was in my 17 years with UNESCO, I could follow, I needed to follow the UNESCO line, but at the same time, there was space for innovation. I want to begin by thanking very much Ambassador Bukova. I think when she became Secretary General, Director General, somebody just said Secretary General, it's Director General, I was just on my way out, so I haven't had the pleasure to work directly with her, but I am positive that it is very difficult to move away from the essential tenets of that organization, and as such, the organization is still dedicated to the promotion of peace and dedicated to the promotion of education. I want to thank you for the rather excellent presentation this morning. Rich. I think we've learned a lot. Incidentally, one of the things I like very much about the UNESCO, the preamble of the UNESCO Constitution, is its first two lines. if wars begin, or since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace should be constructed. Now, that came directly as a result of the effort of the international community to determine exactly how they're going to respond to the World War II. And so the Constitution of UNESCO, and I would rather suggest that you read the preamble, lovely literacy in terms of how the motives and goals of UNESCO have been expressed. But I think our topic suggests that peace is important, but human development is even more important. Of course, and education is crucial to the maintenance of peace, but we have added, in terms of this whole new human development debate, we've added quite a few other issues: maintenance, promotion of health, rights, which is in essence it's a UNESCO matter, but it's, I think, a bigger matter with regard to the OAS. We're much more, I should say we're much more in tune to the promotion and protection of rights. That has been added into the new index with regard to human development. Our topic really is human development in the Americas. And I think the presentation highlighted the fact that though we've made quite a bit of progress, particularly regarding the MDGs, there are still pockets, I call them a very diplomatic term, pockets of concern, pockets of challenges that we need to pay attention to. Bringing girls and women into the system, making sure that our rural areas are not further marginalized. And I think the presentation spoke to several of the things that UNESCO is doing in this area. The orientation of Latin America to innovation, I think, was also highlighted. Ambassador Bukova spoke about the Escola, the Balsa Escola, and the other innovations coming out of Latin America to allow parents and families to create and to contribute more to the well-being of their children, to bring more young people from marginalization into the educational process. One of the concerns that I have is that we have not continued the Latin American tradition to explore whether there are not innovations that are silently in existence that we need to validate. Whenever we promote education, and this is a UNESCO issue as well, we promote innovation. We come into a society, to a community, and we say, we have the ideas, we have the best practice. We seldom ask, is there already best practice? And for me, we need, and we really haven't touched this, we need to explore whether the traditional cultures that are so rich in Latin America, and certainly in the Caribbean, but even more so in Latin America, have within them the capacity, suggestions, traditions that could allow us to expand our notion of education delivery. And I'm not too sure that we have done that yet. Probably UNESCO has done that, because you know UNESCO is not just education, UNESCO is maintenance of culture, promotion of science. And of course we spoke of the need for integrating and having an integrated approach to these. I want to repeat that we need to search out, seek out innovations, not always seek to promote innovations. Because one of the things that you can do the worst things you can do, is to go into a community or to a school where there is already an innovation and come and say, well, I have this innovation. The United Nations has sanctioned it. And the folks said, well, hey, but what do I do with my own innovation? Okay, so it's a question of attitude, it's a question of accommodation that we need to take into consideration. And I think we may find that within those spheres we have the potential for dealing with continuing education, new approaches to early childhood education, all of those which continue to be priority in our work. I like very much the reference to education as an epic. So the epic continues. And within that epic, you have the new approaches like science and technology, and reference was made to the role that ICTs can play in the delivery of education. The epic continues with the search for new pathways to the delivery of education. I think that that was also something that was articulated in our discussion. I want to, of course, I'm never going to be able to capture all the richness of this presentation. I'm hoping that it can be available for distribution. But I want to end with a reference to the higher education issue that was raised by our ambassador. And I think also the representative of the American University. I think we've paid a little too much attention to basic education. I want to say this carefully, because I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay attention to literacy, to improving the effectiveness of the delivery of education at the basic level. But I think in many innovative situations, you find higher education, you find thought, you find research, you find a willingness to innovate. In other words, higher education has a role to play. And that is why I like the question. Higher education has a role to play, not just with regard to the training of graduates. I think that has been overstated, really. I think higher education needs to reorient itself so that in addition to, even as we train and produce new graduates, we go back to the question of research so that we can be asking, when we develop a national profile, really, what opportunities for research are there? In other words, I want to see an engaged university, not just one delivering graduates, but one investigating traditional forms of education, investigating the link between ICTs and education. And as such, I see the potential here in Latin America for us to take advantage of the UNESCO Chairs program to further strengthen the engagement of higher education, of universities in higher education. I was very pleased because it was always, for me, a mystery. What are we going to do after 2015 when we realize that it is not that countries have not done well in terms of realizing reaching the MDGs. It's that the challenge has shifted. The goalpost has shifted. And I think that is what the whole question of education as an epic means, that constantly we have to return to education. Every new age, every new generation will have to go back to education in order to determine new strategies, new techniques, new approaches to delivery of education. So again, thanks, congrats to Sherry and her unit for again ensuring that this tradition doesn't die. Congratulations to Ambassador Bukova for the excellent work that you have been doing in terms of continuing the UNESCO traditions, but also expanding them. And we hope that the innovative traditions that we have in Latin America could be further expanded to include the numerous challenges that we see emerging virtually on a day-to-day basis. Without adequate management of those challenges, the rich potential of the Americas will not be realized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Charles, for wrapping up what has been, I think, a very useful session. I think a very thought-provoking session. We covered a lot of ground. Ambassador Bukova made a great presentation. She talked about issues really where we looked at adaptation to the new realities. She talked about innovation. And she talked about how we plan for the future. She talked about partnerships at the institutional level. She talked about policy coherence in terms of having discussions and dialogues among different ministries. I think we covered the broad span. We covered policy. We covered resources. We covered working with universities. We covered working with institutions at the international level and looking at education and human development in a new way going forward. Not education for today, because we're educating for the future. And I think that's a powerful message that's come across. And I want to thank you for your presentation. I thank you also for really, in some way, validating the OAS's approach to integrated and integral development, where all of these things come together in a very connected way to move forward economic development, prosperity, and growth in the Americas. And I wish to thank Secretary General Insulza for being here and opening this session for us today, and to thank the Department of International Affairs for putting together another wonderful event, and all of you for joining us, because without you, we wouldn't be able to have these cathedral sessions and have these very wonderful opportunities for engagement. Thank you all.